Planning your first game can be a little tricky. It can be a little intimidating, especially if you're going into it new and you haven't planned a lot of projects on your own before. If you go to Google and you look up how to plan projects and what to do for project planning, you get a huge amount of information that's pretty complex and is not very approachable. I've put together a way that I like to plan projects. I've used it for my past two games. I've talked to other game devs about how they plan their projects, and I think this method works pretty well for most people. I think it's a pretty simple approach and it's going to help you get started, especially if you watched my last video where you made a game in 1 week. This is a great place to pick up. It's a great starting point for you to look at maybe taking that 1 week game you did and building it out more and building further on that game to eventually release it into a product that you're proud of and that you want to launch out into the world. In case any of you are new here, my name's Kyle. I make game dev videos on YouTube 2 times per week. I also have a newsletter that you can check out. It's in my channel page and I'll link it down in the description, so feel free to check that out too. Let's get started and talk about how to plan your first game. Before we jump too far into how to plan, I'll give you a little heads up about how I'm going to think about this and how I'm going to talk about this, and that's taking something that's big and breaking it down into small, digestible pieces so that you can focus on those pieces one after the other instead of getting overwhelmed by this big scope project, even if that project is only a couple months long. And those are project milestones. Milestones are a great thing to use in projects because they give you something to celebrate along the way as you're building that project. Celebration, in my opinion, is really key because it keeps you motivated. It also keeps you mindful of important parts of the project's lifetime that you might want to use for marketing. Maybe you want to use as a way to congratulate yourself. And we'll talk about all that soon. Before we get started with these, a couple assumptions. The first one of those assumptions is that you're making a smaller scope game, especially if it's your first game on Steam. I think it's a really good idea for you to do this. So please, please, please consider that if you're thinking about going out of the gate and the first time out making a game that takes you 6 years to make. Please, please, please don't do that. The second assumption is that you're going to make this game for Steam. That's what I've made in the past, and that's what I think this method works really well for. I can see how it could be adjusted, and I have used a similar method to plan other types of projects, so I'm pretty sure it's going to work too. That third assumption is that you are not doing early access. I really am not a fan of early access because it's really just like early release. It doesn't, in my opinion, live up to the let's get the community involved and build something standard, at least not to the way that I would apply it if I were making an app or something like that in a startup environment. So we'll put early access aside and assume that you're doing a normal Steam release game. Let's get started with those milestones. You could even do this along with me if you want to and write it down on a piece of paper or take some notes about it. So feel free to do that as well. It should be enough time to get something out there quickly and get it on paper that you can iterate with. The first milestone is to have your first GDD draft done. I say first because in my opinion, the GDD is something that you should evolve over time as your game approaches release. So when you learn new things, you incorporate that into your GDD, either by editing the original document or keeping track of other documents along the way. And that is so you learn from things you encounter. Learning is really important when you're building products for other people. This first GDD finished phase shouldn't take very long, in my opinion. You don't want to draw this out so that you're designing something for months on end. I don't think it should be incredibly short either, so I'll put roughly 2 weeks on it maybe. That's probably good enough for you to get some prototypes in there that you can play around with. Maybe you can get some other people to play around with them, but this is just the starting point to kick off the project so that you have a strong base to go from for the rest of these 6 milestones. This is not something that you necessarily want to market. You could make social posts about it and talk about it if you want, as with every milestone that we're going to talk about, but this one is mostly just for you and just for getting that project started. All right, second milestone, building a little momentum here. This is your first playable build of your game. It's not necessarily the full core game loop that you talked about. It's not every mechanic, and it definitely doesn't have final art. This is just something that represents your design. It's end-to-end playable, and you could go up to another person and have them play this and get a little feedback from them and see how things are going. You could call this a prototype plus or prototype plus plus if you want to make a programmer joke, but the purpose of this more evolved prototype is so that you get even more feedback. And you'll notice that I've talked about feedback a lot, especially in these early stages. That's because I'm trying to front load a bunch of this feedback stuff so that you have information when you're going through development and when you're getting closer to the end of the project where it's harder to change things. Again, I don't think this is a place where you should spend a lot of time either. Keep it pretty short, keep it focused. It could be really short if you're already convinced you have enough feedback. It could be slightly longer. It's totally up to you and the scope of the project. You want to learn quickly, you want to identify mistakes, and then start moving forward. And your goal with this second milestone is to convince yourself that, cool, yeah, I'm ready to make the store page for this game. I'm ready to ship this thing and get it out to the public and release it, which conveniently gets us to our third milestone, your store page going live. This one is a marketing beat. It's not the largest of the marketing beats we'll talk about, but it is a marketing beat, and you can talk about it and you should talk about it to get eyes on the store page when it's done, when it's up there. Like I said, this is for Steam, and in my opinion, you should get your store page up fairly early. Now, that's not to say get your store page up when you still have default cubes everywhere in there. I think you do want some close to final-ish art in your store page. I wouldn't focus on a trailer at this point necessarily, but I would make sure you have some nice looking screenshots. Maybe you can mock them up as your environment. You have some good store page copy. You've got a nice capsule image that maybe you've hired someone in Fiverr to do. Outside of the trailer, the store page should look like something that you want to show to a potential customer, to a potential player, in the hopes that they'll wishlist that, because you want them to click that wishlist button when they go to your store page. Some ideas for what you might do for marketing on this one is to build up to that store page going live, posting on socials, posting videos as you have them, and just generally banging the pots and pans to try to make attention to get people to go to the store page when it goes live, and make an event out of that. So when it goes live, blast everything saying your store page is live. This part's really great too, because it does lay a foundation for any social post or any marketing you're going to do throughout the rest of the project, because you now have somewhere to point people for your call to action. And that's a really good thing to have. Wishlist at this stage and on Steam for the entire process up until you launch are the only signal you really have to measure how the game's going. The unfortunate thing about wish lists is they're not that strong of an indicator. Why I say they're not a strong indicator is because they really don't take a whole lot of someone's time to do. It just takes a couple seconds to click that wish list button and that's it. There's no larger time commitment there, there's no monetary commitment, so from that standpoint, it's not as strong as a signal as other things. So you've built momentum with these, you've got your store page up, you've played the game with a couple people, now it's time to make that core game loop come to life and actually build it out, and that's milestone number 4. Your core game loop is complete. At this point, you're working toward that core game loop. You have it in there. Most of your art is relatively in place. You may have some special effects missing. You may not have all of the content you want to have in your game, but the core game loop of that thing is done and someone could play it and it roughly represents your final product. Said differently, this is a minimum set of mechanics in place that you could call this idea that you wrote in your GDD a game, and that's the implementation of the game. This one probably is not a strong marketing beat that you want to focus on. You could get it out there, but it is a great opportunity to playtest, because this is when your core game loop is there, people can play it, they can get their hands on it. So focus a bigger playtest on this one, get more people's hands on it, get more feedback. Again, feedback is key, so that you can bring that feedback in and put it into your game so that you can hit our next milestone, which is number 5, your demo. Your first playable demo launch is a really important marketing beat. It's one of the 3 biggest marketing beats you have before your game launches. Now, it's not necessarily important because players play it or because it's a very good tool for converting people into wishlisters. I'll link an article down below from Chris Zukowski that goes into this some more, but essentially that demo is a marketing tool more than it is a conversion tool for people that are going to your page, because most people won't actually play the demo anyway. The reason I say that the demo is important for marketing more than converting players who visit your page into wishlisters, because this is your first real piece of your game that a content creator can get their hands on and can play and can make content about. And a lot of people will do that even if you don't ask for it. A couple things to keep in mind about your demo release is you do want content creators to play this, so leading up to that, maybe a couple weeks before, send some cold emails out, try to get people to play that demo. Having this content go out when your demo is out, and having a trailer that goes out with that demo can help you make a pretty big splash, in my opinion. Hopefully it takes a lot of people to your store page. Your demo launch is also, at least in my opinion, something that you can coordinate with NextFest. And if you do that, that gives you even more way to get more visibility to your store page and hopefully generate more wish lists. We're getting close to the end of the line here. This is the 6th milestone in the project, and that is your release. This is time to celebrate, my friend, because you are releasing that game. It's going out for sale. It's going to the public. Congrats. Way to go. Good job. You've shipped this. You've polished this. You've incorporated all the feedback from all the past milestones in there to get your game out in the best condition it can be. And now is the time for you to not go refresh the sales page over and over again, because that will just stress you out. Come back a day or two later, look at it then. Don't just sit there and hit refresh over and over again. I did that the first time. You may want to look at polishing up your store page here before your game goes live, just so that you make sure it's in the best condition and represents the game as best as it can. so that you can convert people visiting that into wishlisters, or even better, into purchasers, because they can now buy the game, and that's a much stronger signal. All right, I know what you're thinking. Your game released, and we only covered 6 milestones. So what's the deal? What's that 7th milestone? And that is post-launch support. This shows the community that if they've given feedback, maybe they've given reviews on your game, that you've been receptive to that feedback and you've addressed it in some way. Inevitably, you're going to find bugs when that thing launches because you didn't make perfect software. Shocker. There is no such thing. So getting those bug fixes in a way that helps people have a better time with the game will help you in the longer term, at least in my opinion. You can, of course, continue doing post-launch updates, and you probably should, depending on how well your game's going, but I wouldn't necessarily lump that in with this project. I think it's good to close the books on things at some point and start maybe a new project for those post-launch updates. So those are the 7 core milestones that I think are really important for the whole life cycle of a game project. Let me know about any other milestones you have in mind. Let me know what you think about this. And if you end up using this, I'd love to hear from you and see how it's going for you and how you feel like it's working out when you're planning your game. As always, let me know what's going on down in the comments. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.